You are not trapped in scarcity because money is missing. You are trapped because a part of you learned to feel protected by having just enough to survive. Why money still feels out of reach when you keep trying to change. That is the part nobody wants to look at, because it is easier to blame the paycheck, the economy, the debt, the timing, the family you came from, the chances you never received. And I am not saying those things are not real. I know they are real. I know what it feels like to open a banking app and hold your breath before the screen loads. I know the silent panic of seeing a bill arrive before the money does. I know the shame of needing something small and still asking yourself if you can stretch one more week without it. Not because you are careless, but because life taught you to negotiate with need before you ever learned to trust expansion. But scarcity does not only live in the numbers. It starts living in your posture, in your voice, in the way you lower your desire before anyone has a chance to reject it. You check your balance with the phone turned slightly away, even when no one is watching. You walk through a store touching things you already decided not to buy. You study the menu from right to left, price before appetite, caution before hunger. You pretend you are easygoing when someone invites you somewhere, but inside you are already calculating transportation, the meal, the awkward moment when the bill comes. And maybe the hardest part is that you do it so often, so quietly, that it starts to feel like personality. You call it being simple. You call it being careful. You call it knowing your limits. But sometimes what you call limits are just old fear wearing adult clothes. Sometimes the life you defend as maturity is only the life where you stopped letting yourself be surprised by more. So let me ask you something deeper than how much money you want. What would you have to stop being if money stopped being missing? What part of your identity would lose its job if you were no longer the one who always makes it work with less? Because there is a version of you that has built pride around endurance. There is a version of you that knows how to suffer with dignity, how to refuse help before it is offered, how to want quietly enough that nobody can accuse you of being ungrateful. And that version may be exhausted, but it is familiar. It knows the rules of lack. It knows how to prepare for disappointment. It knows how to survive another month by becoming smaller before life forces it to. Abundance, on the other hand, asks for a self you have not practiced being yet. It asks you to receive without apologizing, to choose without panic, to stop treating peace like something you must earn through constant pressure. That is why earning more has not always freed you. A better month can arrive, and your body still waits for punishment. A new opportunity can open, and your mind starts listing the reasons you are not ready. Money can enter your life, and before you even touch it, guilt, urgency, and old obligation decide where it belongs. Scarcity was never only about money. It was about something underneath it, something quieter, something you may not be ready to admit yet. Maybe lack became the place where you knew who you were. Maybe struggling gave you a name, a role, a reason to stay guarded. And maybe abundance feels dangerous because it would ask you to stop introducing yourself through what you survived. That is where this begins. Not with a budget, not with a strategy, not with another promise that discipline alone will save you, but with the hidden identity that still believes becoming free might cost too much. I want to slow down here because this is where most people get misunderstood. When you live close to the edge for long enough, people start calling your caution a mindset problem, as if you can simply decide to feel safe after years of counting every dollar before it exists. They do not see the private negotiations. They do not see you standing in a pharmacy with 2 items in your hand, putting one back because the total crossed a number only you knew. They do not see you opening the refrigerator and building a meal around what is left, not what you want. They do not see how tired you are of being creative with limits, how heavy it becomes to always find a way, to always adjust, to always smile while your mind is doing math in the background. And they do not understand that the deepest exhaustion is not only from lacking money, it is from managing the version of yourself that lack forced you to become. I remember Maya, not because her story was dramatic from the outside, but because it was painfully ordinary. A friend invited her to dinner on a Friday night, nothing extravagant, just a small place with warm lights, loud tables, and people laughing like the week had not taken anything from them. She looked at the message and instantly opened her banking app, not because she wanted to, but because her body had learned that desire needed permission from the balance first. She calculated the meal, the ride, the tip, the small possibility that someone would suggest dessert. Then she typed, "I'm so exhausted tonight, maybe next time." The lie was not cruel. It was protective. But after she sent it, she sat on the edge of her bed with her shoes still on, feeling the strange ache of having abandoned herself before anyone else could notice she could not afford to show up freely. What hurt was not just missing dinner. It was knowing she had practiced sounding fine so well that nobody would hear the truth underneath it. That is how scarcity becomes more than circumstance. It teaches you to disappear in polite ways. You become the person who says, "You all go ahead." You become the person who insists you are not hungry. You become the person who says the cheaper option is your favorite before anyone asks. You become the one who checks the total twice before handing over the card, already rehearsing what you will say if it declines. And over time, the pain becomes difficult to name because it starts wearing respectable language. You call it prudence. You call it being realistic. You call it not getting carried away. And sometimes it is wisdom. Sometimes choosing carefully is healthy, necessary, honest. But there is a difference between wisdom that protects your future and fear that keeps your identity small. Wisdom says, "This choice matters, so I will be intentional." Fear says, "Do not reach, because reaching will expose you." Wisdom helps you build. Fear keeps you performing survival, even when a door is opening. And this is why I do not believe you are lazy. I do not believe you are weak. I do not believe you are simply bad with money because you bought one small comfort after denying yourself for weeks. I believe a part of you has been trying to protect you with the only strategy it knows. Expect less, ask for less, risk less, become less disappointed. Losing is predictable. Wanting more is not. Staying in the identity of the one who struggles gives you a script. You know how to apologize for needing time. You know how to explain why you cannot go. You know how to make sacrifice look noble even when it is quietly breaking your relationship with possibility. So before we call it self-sabotage, we need to call it what it really is. Protection that has outlived the season it was built for. And until you see that, you may keep trying to change your finances while secretly defending the identity that was formed by not having enough. Because the next level will not only ask you to earn differently, it will ask you to stop being loyal to the version of you that survived by expecting disappointment first. It will ask you to notice where your caution is still serving life and where it has become a small room with familiar walls. Only then can the real shift begin. There is a moment when you realize scarcity is not only something you are trying to escape, it is also something you are trying to understand without betraying the version of you that survived it. And that realization can hurt because it removes the comfort of blaming everything outside you while still honoring the truth that outside pressure shaped you. I am not asking you to deny the bills, the history, the closed doors, or the years when money really did not come. I am asking you to look at what happened after those years entered your identity. Because sometimes the season that taught you survival becomes the story that blocks your expansion. Sometimes the very discipline that kept you alive starts making every open door look suspicious. You receive a compliment and search for the catch. You see a better path and immediately calculate how it could collapse. You get close to more, then feel exposed, as if wanting a larger life makes you irresponsible before you even begin. And if you do not pause long enough to notice it, you may mistake the cage for character. The shift begins when you stop treating scarcity as proof that you failed and start seeing it as a transition your identity has not completed yet. There is real wisdom in being careful. There is real maturity in planning, saving, refusing to spend just to impress people who will not sit with you when the consequences arrive. But there is also fear that borrows the language of maturity because it knows you respect responsibility. It says, "Be smart," when it really means, "Do not be seen wanting." It says, "Wait until you are ready," when it really means, "Do not risk becoming someone others can judge." It says, "You do not need that," when the truth is you never learned how to receive without feeling guilty afterward. And this is where the pattern becomes visible. You are not only avoiding waste, you may be avoiding the identity of someone who chooses with confidence. You may be avoiding the person who charges the full price, accepts the invitation, opens the email, applies for the role, walks into the room without shrinking to make other people comfortable. That is not financial hesitation anymore. That is self-recognition refusing to update. So I want you to walk through this slowly, not as an exercise to fix yourself, but as a mirror you cannot keep avoiding. Who would you be if you stopped proving that you deserve little? Do not answer quickly. Let that question interrupt the part of you that built a whole personality around being easy to accommodate. What would that version do with money that you do not do today? Maybe they would not spend wildly. Maybe they would simply stop apologizing for needing support. Maybe they would pay for the course instead of waiting until they feel perfectly prepared. Maybe they would replace the broken thing before turning discomfort into a badge of honor. Maybe they would save from peace instead of fear, give from overflow instead of obligation, and say no without turning refusal into guilt. Then ask yourself this: what keeps you from becoming that person now, before the money arrives? Because if you wait for money to give you identity, you may keep losing money to the old self the moment it appears. If you wait for proof before you practice freedom, every opportunity will feel too large for the person you still believe you are. What would you have to stop being if money stopped being missing? Maybe you would have to stop being the one who earns love by carrying everything alone. Maybe you would have to stop being the one who is praised for needing nothing. Maybe you would have to stop being loyal to the smallness that once kept you safe. Maybe you would have to stop confusing being needed with being valued. And once you see that, something inside the story starts to move, not instantly, not perfectly, but honestly enough that your old reactions become harder to obey without questioning them. Scarcity stops being a sentence and starts becoming a doorway, because now you are not fighting only the numbers. You are meeting the identity that keeps returning to them. You begin to notice the moment you make yourself cheaper before anyone questions your worth. You notice the moment you reject a possibility before it has the chance to reject you. You notice the exact second you confuse peace with danger because your body is used to pressure. And awareness does not magically pay the bill, but it changes who is holding the pen when the next chapter is written. You are no longer just reacting to lack. You are watching the old role try to survive inside a new life. That is the beginning of abundance with roots. Not pretending everything is fine. Not forcing a positive thought over a real wound, but learning to stand at the edge of more and say, I recognize why this scares me, but I will not keep calling fear my wisdom. Because the life waiting for you may not require you to become someone unrecognizable. It may require you to become someone you have only met in brief moments, when you told the truth instead of performing ease, when you asked for the amount your work deserved, when you allowed a kind gesture to reach you without immediately trying to repay it. It may require you to finally stop shrinking into the identity that was only supposed to carry you through, not carry you forever. So let us breathe for a moment, because after seeing the pattern, the next step is not to attack yourself for having it. You do not heal scarcity by shaming the self that learned to survive it. You begin by understanding why that self stayed so alert, why it counted, why it prepared, why it kept one hand near the exit, even when life was finally offering a room you could rest in. There is a tenderness needed here, because the old identity was not your enemy. It was a shelter built during a storm, but a shelter becomes a prison when the storm has passed, and you still refuse to open the door. The question now is not whether you should hate the way you protected yourself. The question is whether you are ready to stop mistaking protection for destiny. Because the part of you that survived with less may deserve gratitude, but it does not deserve full control over every future choice. When you stop resisting abundance, the change does not always look dramatic at first. It can look like saying the real price without laughing nervously afterward. It can look like buying the item you have needed for months without turning the receipt into evidence against yourself. It can look like accepting help and not immediately searching for a way to make yourself smaller in return. It can look like eating the meal without mentally punishing yourself before the first bite. It can look like opening the message about an opportunity and reading it all the way through before deciding you are not qualified. These moments may seem small, but they are not small to the identity that was trained to shrink before choosing. Every time you allow yourself to receive without apology, you interrupt the old agreement that said safety only exists when you need almost nothing. You teach your nervous system that having more room does not mean you are about to lose the ground beneath you. And this is where wisdom returns in its true form. Real wisdom does not demand that you spend to prove you are free. Real wisdom does not confuse abundance with performance, with showing people you finally made it, with using money to decorate an identity you still have not trusted. Real wisdom asks a quieter question. Can I make this choice from peace instead of pressure? Can I say yes without panic and no without punishment? Can I hold money without turning it into proof that I am good, bad, worthy, behind, late, selfish, or finally acceptable? Because the point is not to become reckless. The point is to stop treating alarm as the only responsible adult in the room. There is a version of maturity that expands you. It plans, but it does not suffocate. It saves, but it does not worship anxiety. It chooses carefully, but it does not make desire feel like a crime. It lets you check the numbers without making the numbers decide your entire worth. And slowly, something begins to reorganize. You stop introducing yourself through exhaustion. You stop making struggle the evidence that you are serious. You stop confusing constant pressure with purpose. At first, abundance may feel unfamiliar, almost too quiet, because you are used to proving yourself through tension. But then you begin to understand that peace is not a trap. More is not always a threat. Ease does not make you weak. Receiving does not make you selfish. The new self does not arrive by destroying the old one. It arrives when you thank the old one for carrying you and refuse to let it keep choosing the size of your future. This is the turn, not the loudest moment, but one of the most important. Because once you stop needing scarcity to recognize yourself, money can become something different in your hands. Not a judge, not a savior, not a punishment waiting to happen. A tool, a current, a mirror. And maybe, for the first time, you do not have to ask only how much you can afford. You can begin to ask what kind of person you are willing to become when life stops requiring you to stay small. And now we return to the beginning, but not as the same person who started listening. You may have arrived here thinking the problem was only the amount, the account, the debt, the next payment, the next chance to finally breathe. But somewhere underneath all of that, there was always a deeper question waiting for you. Who do you become when you no longer need struggle to explain your life? Who do you become when your identity is not built around stretching, hiding, delaying, apologizing, and making absence look like discipline? Because money can change your options, yes. But identity changes what you allow yourself to do with those options once they arrive. Without that shift, more can enter your hands and still feel like something you are not allowed to keep. A full cart can still make you tense. A paid invoice can still feel temporary. An open door can still feel like a test if the old self is deciding what you deserve. This is where the old role starts losing its power. Not all at once. Not like a dramatic ending. More like a quiet refusal. You notice the voice that tells you to shrink, and you do not obey it immediately. You notice the habit of checking for disaster before choosing, and you let the choice have air. You notice the impulse to make yourself cheaper, easier, smaller, and something in you finally says, no, I know where this came from, but it does not get to name me anymore. That is the moment abundance stops being a fantasy and becomes a confrontation. Because it is not only asking whether you want more, it is asking whether you are willing to stop belonging to the version of you that only felt real while surviving. The one who always had an explanation ready. The one who could turn disappointment into a joke before anyone saw it land. The one who carried the weight so well that people forgot to ask if it was heavy. Listen closely. You were never meant to turn endurance into a permanent address. You were never meant to confuse being low maintenance with being whole. You were never meant to spend your entire life proving that you can carry less, need less, ask for less, dream less, and still call that strength. Enough. Not because the past was meaningless. Not because what you survived was small. But because survival was supposed to carry you across the bridge, not convince you to build a home in the middle of it. You can honor what protected you without letting it manage your future. You can respect the discipline that held you together without letting it punish every desire that tries to rise. This is the arrival. Scarcity is not the absence of money. It is the fear of who you become without it. And if that touched something in you, tell me, because I want to keep building this path with you. Follow me here, not for noise, not for performance. For the part of you that is finally ready to stop shrinking just to feel familiar. And when the final screen appears, let it hold this truth in front of you. You are not waiting for money to give you permission. You are learning how to become the person who can receive more without abandoning yourself. So carry this with you after the video ends, into the next bill, the next invitation, the next price you name, the next choice that asks you not to disappear. Let it interrupt the moment you start making your life smaller, just because small has been easier to explain. What would you do today if you knew money was only waiting for you to decide who you are willing to become?